Welcome everyone to our Lunch with League, which is held the third Thursday of every month. I am Carol Watts, and I'm the president of the LWV San Jose, Santa Clara, and we're hosting this public event. We're so pleased to welcome Bruce Olszewski today to speak with us. He's the director of the Center for the Development of Recycling at San Jose State University. I'm so looking forward to seeing his presentation and hearing his message about this very important topic. So before I introduce him, I'd like to welcome any new attendees to our virtual luncheon today. We're really pleased that you're here. We invite you to join us at about 1 p.m. in a meeting format so we can chat. It's not the same thing as being in person, but we think it's the next best thing that we can do right now. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization for women and men, and we encourage the informed and active participation in government. We influence public policy through education and advocacy. We never support or oppose any candidate or political party. One big event that's coming up next month is the recall election on September 14th. All registered voters should be receiving your vote by mail ballot and voter information guides from both the county and the state. I know I've got 2 of those 3 already. To find information about this election, go to our website, lwvsjsc.org, and look for Recall Election 2021. You will find links for helpful resources like votersedge.org, which has profiles submitted by almost all of the recall candidates in California. If you want to learn about the history and the process of recall elections in California, our sister league, Southwest Santa Clara Valley, produced an excellent program last week with Ann Ravel, who's a past member of the Federal Election Commission, and Shannon Boucher, our county's registrar of voters. So do vote. It's easy to fill out your ballot, then mail it or drop it in a drop-off box or a vote center just before the election or on election day. The League never supports or opposes candidates, so we do not make recommendations for your vote in this special election, but we are very interested in the process itself. Today, our action director, Vicki Alexander, hi Vicki, is helping to host this event, and she will be asking the questions that you entered when you registered, or Bruce will be also got them ahead of time and he can answer them. Or enter your questions into the chat. If you prefer to ask a question yourself, you will have that opportunity later. And now, Vicki, please introduce Bruce.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are so pleased to welcome Bruce Olchefsky to speak with us today. He's the director of the Center for the Development of Recycling, San Jose State University. Just listen to some of his accomplishments and contributions to our community. He earned San Jose State University's first master's degree in environmental studies. He was the first environmental specialist with the city of San Jose, and he designed the city's first citywide water conservation program. He founded and managed the students who operate the Center for the Development of Recycling at San Jose State, the Santa Clara County Recycling Reuse Hotline, and Household Hazardous Waste Appointment Center, the website recyclestuff.org for the counties of Santa Clara and San Mateo. He chaired the City of Campbell's Planning Commission and was president of the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition. And he was recognized as a hidden treasure of San Jose State University in 1997. No longer hidden to us, this man seems to be an example of the impact that a single person can make in this world. Bruce Olchefsky, welcome. And Bruce, if you can, yes, turn your video and audio on.
There we go. All right, everyone, clicking some buttons. I'm going to click the share screen and bring up a PowerPoint for today. And let's hope all of that will work. Okay. And you should be able to see this PowerPoint now. Can you confirm that, Vicki?
Yeah, that's okay. That's
Yes,
good.
sorry, I was on mute.
Okay,
but
everyone
yes.
can see it. Well, okay, fantastic. So in addition to all those things that they just said about me, that Vicki so kindly shared about me, I also am known to cook dinner and do the dishes at home too. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having interest in recycling and these ideas about the circular economy. It's very important that we discuss this on so many different levels. And so I'm going to just get into this presentation. It'll last about 30 minutes or so. And then I do have, I have received questions from you. And I have some responses to those at the end of the presentation. And I'm glad to take live questions today, of course. Okay, so let's start with this, that, you know, what I like to do as a professor is always start with, you know, what's the issue or what's the problem? You know, what is it that we're trying to solve? Because I think that that's critical really to understand anything, is to first understand the key problems. And so it really comes from things like exponential population growth. So what that means is the doubling of the human population. So, you know, in 1960, for example, it was 3 billion, and I was born a few years before then. Today, we're nearly 8 billion. So we've had this massive population growth. I mean, if you think about the beginning of time until 1960, 3 billion, and we have more than doubled that in a generation. So along with that comes economic growth, because you have more people and more consumption. When you have more consumption, you have more processing of materials, so you have more pollutants. And of course, we've also been reducing the, let's say, the ecological green spaces around the planet. We know that the tropics are smaller, the forests are smaller. We've had damages, you know, on and on and on. I can go, I have a whole course just talking about the environmental problems that we have created. So what that means is that we have choices, because we can either choose to reduce the negatives, or we can continue to live with the consequences, such as what we're going through now. I mean, it's undoubtedly clear that the fires, for example, that we're experiencing are primarily fueled by climate change. And we've known this actually for quite a long time. So the opportunities then are to create a society that really engages in sustainability. And so we have to ask ourselves, are the actions that we're going to take, will they be enough? And with all of that, what's the role of materials? So let's talk about, you know, what do we mean by sustainability in the first place? So there was a famous report called the Brundtland Report. It came from the United Nations, and they defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So we are not at that sustainability level right now. We're still running a deficit, an environmental deficit. So the pillars of sustainable development are economic growth, which might seem contrary to what we're trying to do, but we know that the economy will grow with population. So another pillar would be protecting the environment, and then social equality. You know, how do we not exploit other people? These are things that came from the UN. So really the goal then is human ecosystem equilibrium. So we have to find some sort of balance, because we're currently out of balance, which is creating significant problems. So this challenge to sustainability and unlimited economic growth is population growth, overconsumption, wasting energy and materials, pollutants, environmental degradation, of course, climate change, and all of that is part of what we call the IPAT. The IPAT it's this concept where the total impact that is created on society is determined by the size of the population, the affluence of a particular population, and then the technologies that are used. So a society like we have in the United States consumes more stuff than does a society basically south of the equator. And what we know is that as globalization has been increasing, we have more people in more countries consuming more stuff. So we're creating even more environmental problems. Now I'm going to lead all this into recycling, but first we really need to start with this. So for many of us, sustainability is an imperative for change. And for others, they just see it as a threat to business practices. So we have to ask ourselves, do we want sustainability to be a vague concept, or are we going to really get involved for systemic change? Because incremental changes, from my perspective, are just not doing the job. The problems are happening much faster than the solutions are currently. So, we need to engage in solutions. So the ultimate solution is the way the Earth has always worked, right? I'm probably reminding you of your early education when you learned about the ecosystem, that everything's connected to everything else, but we tend to forget this. So we are part of the system, but we don't manage the environment system. We are riding along. So you can see with this chart that everything starts with chemicals that make up everything in the environment. We have producers and then consumers that consume the producers. And then you have, there's the carnivores that eat the herbivores, and then everything eventually decomposes back into chemicals. So we are all part of this. So here's the thing about with the environment and recycling is that, energy tends to get a lot of attention. We're always talking about, solar energy and the need to move to electricity, which I'm not so sure that that's really the right answer, but there's a lot of that. But energy is always part of the system. And in the second law of energy, we know that there's the first law of energy and the second law of energy. The second law of energy basically says that energy always goes from high quality to low quality. Energy always degrades. But through all of this is matter. So matter is all the stuff, right? So we don't pay enough attention to stuff because we apply energy to matter to make stuff for us to consume. So we have embedded energy, embedded pollution, embedded labor that goes into the products that we consume each and every day. So we know that in nature, all organisms rely on each other. And for people that don't understand that, I say, well, go watch The Lion King again, and you'll get, so you can start singing Circle of Life with your kids and that kind of thing. So organisms evolved, and hopefully human systems, political systems are going to evolve. We have been, but we need to engage more in how nature works because we are part of it. We are not separate from it. So we know that everything recycles, and materials are going to recycle either as a resource or a pollutant. There is no other option. It's a resource or a pollutant. And it is political decisions that decide what the fate of materials will be, a pollutant or a resource. So we need to have industrial processes that will mimic natural processes. So how are we going to do this? Well, in human systems, we respond with markets, right? It's markets that close open loops of consumption. And if we engage in this, we can create more jobs, we can create more opportunity, and we can shrink our ecological footprints, meaning the negative impacts that we create on the planet. So speaking of, defining the problem first, let me make this very clear. So in the United States, in 2018, the last year that we have data, because it takes a while to collect the data, report the data, publish the data, it's pretty close to 300 million tons of stuff that we have consumed, processed, discarded into the environment. These are things now that are pollutants, right? And so in 1960, it was about 2.7 pounds per person per day. And today, with twice as many people, we're producing almost twice as much material per person. So we're not more environmentally inclined. We may think so, but we're actually consuming even more stuff than we had in the recent past. And in California, it's even worse, right? So it's closer to 8 pounds per person per day, which means that in a lifetime, a person's going to generate about 105 tons of material per person, right? That they leave behind for future generations to manage. Now, you know, sometimes people say, oh, well, won't we just mine landfills? And the answer to that is no, we won't. And there's a lot of reasons why, but that's not going to happen because cities have grown out to where landfills are. Our county is full of closed landfills that are surrounded by cities. So what this chart here shows you is that the generation rates on a chart. So you can see from 1960 to 2018, there's the per capita generation and then the overall. So the overall has been going up. Per capita recently has been fairly steady, but remember, we have more population, a larger population. So what is it that we're throwing away, right? If you look at this chart, you see this steady increase. So this means all of the materials, right? Steady increase here. You see a little dip right here. This is 2007, 2008. And what that means is that when there's an economic recession, people buy less stuff. When they buy less stuff, they throw away less stuff. So for those of you interested in stuff like the stock market, what you would do is keep an eye on garbage rates, right? Are we throwing away less garbage? That means people are consuming less stuff. That means we're on our way to the recession, right? Strange, but true. So you can see here that paper is significant, right? Still today, we throw away more paper than any other material, which is very odd because it's extraordinarily recyclable. And there's less paper being consumed today compared to previous years, but it's still the largest material. So you see here paper, glass, metals, plastics, which has been steadily increasing, and food waste, strangely enough, has been increasing over time. And then you have yard trimmings. We used to call that yard waste, but then we recognize it's not waste, it's in fact a resource. And then there's everything else. So that's like the inert materials, bricks and stones and leather and things like that. So let's dig down a little bit more, and you'll see that what I have here is a chart that shows you the materials that we've been throwing away that are categorized. And the top material is paper and paperboard, 23%. This is likely to continue to increase. Why? Because of home deliveries from Amazon, of course, right? And other types of services, but that's a lot of boxes that are coming into people's homes and a lot of excess packaging. Secondly, there's food. Food waste is significant. And in California, we have a piece of state legislation, SB 1383, to address that. And there's going to be a lot of new programs running out, coming out to all of us. And then we have plastics, which have been increasing, and that's because it's lightweight, low cost, and it's a great packaging material because it does such a good job in protecting the item. And then there's yard trimmings. So yard trimmings, significant markets for those. When you go down to the Monterey County area, you'll see all the agriculture going on. A lot of that, you know, the minerals and stuff that get into the food stuff that we eat actually comes right from yard trimmings that are processed into compost for them. So we have this economic system that sorry about that, that flows into that has been promoting waste, right? Because we've had subsidies for years that encourage mining, encourage removal of trees, but we've not had those same types of things from the federal government for things like recycling and closing open loops. So as a result of that, we have been creating a lot of waste. So today we have this linear flow of materials. If I can get that to work right. So we have materials that come from the manufacturer to the retailer to the consumer. And then from the consumer, it goes into recycling and garbage bins that are funded by, of course, ourselves. And then we have to pay for that stuff to be either recycled or landfilled. And so this whole system results in this big ecological footprint. And we create all this problem. And another problem on top of that is that materials, right, are actually about getting close to half of all the US greenhouse gas production. So when you think about it, we often think that, oh, energy is the problem and that we all need to be driving electric cars or hybrids. But I can tell you that about half of the problem is from materials, and we're not paying any attention to this. And one of the reasons I say we're not paying any, well, that's a bit of an overstatement, but we don't have courses at universities teaching people about recycling. I teach basically the only one in the entire California State University system. So I find this to be a massive problem that we're ignoring this. So we have this system then in the US of wasting materials and we waste energy, a linear system. Nature does not work linear. In nature, everything's connected to everything else. So that means we are creating more and more and more pollutants because when we waste materials, we waste energy. So recycling in itself will not be enough because it's basically mopping the floor while the faucet's still running. We just keep creating the problem. So what we need to do is to close open loops. So we have energy and materials that are applied to materials to make stuff, and then recycling and reuse return some of the stuff back to the economy. So what this does is that creates jobs, it reduces greenhouse gas production, it reduces air pollutants, it reduces environmental problems from the extraction of materials to be processed into new materials. Now, will we still have some pollutants and some waste? Yes, there's always going to be entropy involved, but this closing the loop really needs to be forefront in policy. So there's a lot of other efforts that are involved in moving us towards sustainability. Here's a bunch of them that I've listed here. And in this presentation, I'm merely discussing sustainable materials management. Another term for recycling, because recycling is part of this whole concept of sustainable materials management. And that concept came out of a conference I was at with the EPA, and they wanted to call it something else. And I was like, no, it's not. What we're talking about is materials and the sustainable use of materials. So they've been using that term ever since. So that was pretty great. So what that means that we move to this thing called the circular economy, right? When we minimize the use of resource inputs by maximizing resource use efficiency. So in other words, really pushing closing the loop. When we involve other elements like integrating cleaner production, and we require clean production along supply chains. So when companies buy things from other companies, they want their service providers and their supply chain partners to have their products made of or include significant quantity of recycled content material. And in doing this, we minimize the creation of waste, we minimize pollution, we minimize greenhouse gas emissions, and we can then also employ reuse and sharing and repair, refurbishment, remanufacturing and recycling to create a closed loop system. And also in doing that, we create more and more and more local jobs, which is going to be critical because we are currently losing jobs, not so much to globalization and China is what a lot of people tend to talk about, but it's robots, right? It's robots that have been replacing a lot of employment. because robots work for much lower cost, and industry works to try to reduce their cost. So we need to find ways to employ people. And so creating jobs is critical, and the circular economy does just that. So what can we do? There's 3 levels of action. At an individual level for firms like industries and companies, it's reducing consumption of resources. That means more efficient use of what the products they have, reducing emissions, and then recycling their byproducts. And so many are doing that, and that is really great. And the other is maximizing recycled content, particularly in packaging and products and in buildings. We don't do enough of that. And this is critically important because packaging, according to the EPA, is a minimum of 40% of everything that's thrown away. When you go to stuff in your recycling bin, just look and you will see that most of the stuff you're putting in there, probably much more than 40%, is packaging material. And so just imagine the massive amount of benefits we could have if packaging is made of recycled content material. So we can have things like reuse and recycling resources within industrial parks that are within counties that are particularly designed to create local jobs by creating products from recycled content material. Eco chains, for example, of byproduct exchanges. By circulating resources among industry and urban systems, we create this local regional loop, or even statewide. And California would be massively influential globally because we are the 5th largest economy in the world, right? Okay, so sustainable materials management is not waste management, right? It's very different because we know that waste management is pollution management, and it's costly to ratepayers. We get these rate increases that infuriate people, and managing waste, this maintains this linear flow of extraction, production, consumption, and disposal. Sustainable materials management closes the loop so that we have less pollution, fewer people that are damaged by pollution, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and then we also have less need for pollution management because we're working on closing these loops. It solves problems by not creating problems. So there's a number of elements that are involved in sustainable materials management, like it's called design for the environment, or DFE. That means designing products that are recycled content, energy efficient, have less packaging. Design for disassembly, that means designing products so that they can be repaired. The Federal Trade Commission just is considering right to repair regulations currently. That's fantastic. There's extended producer responsibility. That basically means that if when manufacturers make something, that they would have to be responsible for the end of life for that product. So we currently have that for a number of products, but this will be much greater if an item that will be on the 2022 ballot is approved by the voters. There is a packaging piece of that will be on the ballot that specifically targets plastics. Basically, it's a if you make it, you must take it provision. And this would be, I think, a wonderful solution to the massive plastic pollution problem that we have. And what this would hopefully do is moving costs more from individuals and local governments to those industries that create that problem. And this is not a new idea, because in Germany, they began doing it. It was called the Dual System Deutschland, or the DSD, also known as the Green Dot. And because Germany is very influential because of the size of their economy in Europe, it expanded throughout the EU. And so this has been very effective in reducing the volume of materials that have otherwise were being managed as waste materials. Okay, so Plastics then can be confusing. And so, and then we get even more confused because the greenwashing comes out and people talk about, compostable, as though compostable is a solution. I can tell you that emphatically, it is not a solution because when you put stuff in your garbage can, like compostable plastics, it's going to go to the landfill. And at the landfill, everything is crushed to take away all light and oxygen from all materials in a landfill. In other words, when you don't have light and you don't have any air and you don't have any water because the water is can't get into the landfill because of daily caps, you won't have any decomposition. So it won't compost, right? Basically what landfills do is entomb materials. Things don't magically disappear. So compostable is only good if you just throw it out on the street and let it decompose, and nobody wants to see that. And burning is also an extraordinarily bad idea because it perpetuates the myth of a way, that there's such a thing as a way. But then, websites can be helpful to find out what you can do with stuff. And hey, that's what I do, right? That's one of the things that I do. I operate the county recycling hotline and website. So you can always call us, or you can always come to our website, and you can get on our chat line, and you can hunt around there trying to figure out what you do with something. And if you can't find it, or if you're confused, again, call us or use our chat line. So about waste to energy, people think that, oh, garbage is bad, energy is good. And I got to tell you, that's just the wrong way to think about it, because when we burn materials, we waste all of the effort and energy and people and labor it took to make that stuff. And then we create toxic emissions, which are going to pollute whoever happens to live near them. It's going to contribute to climate change. There's less employment with burning than recycling. And oh, by the way, who's going to pay for the burners? You would. And so what does the plastics industry want? They want you to pay for garbage burners because they don't want to be responsible for their product. So this is an extraordinarily bad idea. It encourages wasting. It's anti-circular economy. It's anti-sustainability. And it also would compete with recycling, and we'd have less recycling. So we have lots of options to, when we discard stuff, recycling and at your curbside, but then there's the private companies, and then there's a lot of reuse, right? A lot of donation. But the key to all this stuff is markets. So I know this chart looks a little confusing, but basically what it says is that when we discard something, we're not throwing it away, but we discard something, and it either becomes garbage, right? And garbage means stuff that has no markets, right? So if it doesn't have a market, then that means it's garbage. And we have household hazardous waste programs. And if you have household hazardous waste, batteries, oil, paint, herbicides, pesticides, call our hotline. We'll set up an appointment for you, and you can bring that to the county facility at no charge. It's completely free for residents because residents pay for this program. And so other options you have for discards is recycling and composting and reuse. And then all these different methods of getting this material, private companies and curbs, government programs. And then it goes to brokers and what's called MRFs, material recovery facilities, where they separate everything into different types of products. So you have bales of material. And I think I have that on the, so you have piles of stuff like that, and then it starts to get sorted like that, right? But the problem is that we need better sorting equipment because we tend to get plastics that get mixed in with paper, glass that gets in paper. And so there's a lot of contamination. And this is why China has come forward and said, we're not taking this stuff anymore because the materials that you're sending us are such poor quality because it's been sorted so poorly. So, I heard from a lot of people that were blaming China, but it's like, China's not the problem. The problem is us because we're not separating things enough. and we're not separating things enough because the requirements haven't been high enough for that cities put onto their processors, and that needs to happen. So here's examples of bales of materials. There's a bale of cans there and aluminum. That's steel, and over here, strangely enough, those are candles that were taken out of the Charles Street facility in San Jose. Those go off to make fire logs. So I already talked about China, but China had what's called the Green Fence and the National Sword Program. They rejected a lot of materials, and that's because the stuff came in, stuff gets so dirty. So we need to sort things better. So we've had a lot of legislation to make recycling work better, and it's covered a lot of all these things that I have put here for you. Cell phones, for example, every company that sells a cell phone has to take them back. We have legislation now that affected carpets and e-waste and food waste and sharps, and perhaps you've been to a local CVS or something like that, and you've seen medical drop-off. You can drop off your meds. All of these locations, by the way, are on our website. But here's a place where you can see legislation. There's just dozens and dozens of pieces of legislation introduced in California every year. So getting back to like the nature thing I was talking about, in nature, there are equivalents with industry. So in the environment, nature, we have the environment, and the equivalent of that in industry would be markets. And nature has organisms, industry has companies. Nature has niches, ecological niches. Industry has market niches. In nature, there's the food web, and in industry, there's the product life cycle. So there's a lot of equivalence, and we can copy this stuff because we communicate through economics, and it is critical that we close the open loops, because that is the key problem that we have with creating pollution and greenhouse gases. So economic incentives are what's needed, and essentially it's just like training your dog. You discourage the bad and you encourage the good, right? So you tax the bad and encourage the good with these products. We need to internalize externalities. That means the people who create the problem should pay for it. Industry that creates the problem should create the solutions. And currently, industry does not want to do that because they just want to sell stuff. They don't want to be responsible for the end of life of their product. And that's where extended producer responsibility comes in. That's where this ballot initiative comes in that you'll see in 2022. So another element of that would be to eliminate all the extraction subsidies that we have. We still allow companies to get subsidies for cutting down trees and digging up our national forest lands, which is, to me, it's just insane that we still do that. And it's such a waste of money, particularly when we have a multi-trillion-dollar budget deficit. So in the future, we will, though, reclaim more materials. Why? Because there's been government mandates. California's had a bunch of those laws that I showed you that have been, that enable us to collect more materials. This society is becoming more environmentally aware. When I joined the Environmental Studies Department back in 1989 as a professor, there were 4 or 5 of us, and we barely had enough enrollment. Yesterday, we had a faculty meeting, and there were 20 of us that were there. So there's more people that are now teaching environmental things, more students that are interested, more green virtue from in society, more people that want this kind of thing to happen, and they are pushing legislators to do stuff. And with social media, there's a lot of calling out of bad industrial practices, and industry wants to close open loops. They want to engage in green virtues because they know that their customers want that. So it's important to be educated on the issues. So I'm grateful that you're listening today, so that hopefully I provided you with some educational material, and then we can use that to pass resolutions and ordinances, get involved in decision making, because that's where the game is played. It's played in in the halls of Sacramento. It's not with the invisible hand of the market, right? Which is what industry would have us believe. So the takeaways from this presentation today is that, wasting is increasing. Recycling alone is not going to be enough. Capitalism is king. It'll continue to be king. So we have to speak in its language, and its language is markets. So we have to create markets, because markets is what close the loops. But industry is not designed to do enough. The invisible hand of the market is not going to be enough. Individual actions, like what you choose to do at home, that is not going to be enough. We need, and then there's the problem of government being overly influenced by industry. That's the problem of money in politics. So nonetheless, despite these problems, we have to continue to push ahead as we have been doing, because it's imperative that institutional action be taken. And that means to push for more legislation, create better programs, to close open loops, to create opportunities, and to recognize that our children really are important. And when we say things like we love our country and we love our children, we prove it by taking actions that close open loops. So I encourage you to be a troublemaker by be like John Muir and ask stubborn, disagreeable, and necessary questions, so that we can move creating more solutions. Because it's going to take people like you to get to this point where we will have the end of trash, right? So let's keep calm and recycle. And thanks much.
Okay, let me get my
I was
video
just gonna
going.
say, yeah, this last slide here is just showing you that we have options. We will continue to put stuff in landfills like this ugly truck here, or we'll have nice green and blue earth with, things looking good. So I'm opening the questions now. Vicki, how would you like to handle that?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That was a great talk, Bruce. A lot of information. So we have a number of questions that the Climate Change Committee came up with over the course of this year that we've already submitted to Bruce. And then we also shared some that came in with your registration. Just a couple have come in during the talk. Attendees can continue to enter questions into chat, or if you want to ask your own question, you can click on raise hand and we'll try to get them all in. One that came in right at the end is, what legislation is most important to support, Bruce? Are there something like subsidies for recycled products, or is there a way for us to tap into legislation that might be important to support?
Well, there's in my presentation, there was a link to legislation that is in California. Cal Recycle keeps a list of them. Also, we have in our county, there is the Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission. These are elected officials from different cities that represent the entire county, and they make decisions on how to spend the taxes that people pay on their garbage bill. I know this sounds confusing, but when we pay our garbage bills, there is a fee that is countywide, and it pays for things like the Household Hazardous Waste Program and other things related to recycling. But the other element is to be involved with them. So that commission gets all its advice from what's called the Implementation Committee, or the IC, and this is operated completely by local government staff members. So these would be recycling program managers from every city in our county. And these people are extraordinarily influential, and there's virtually zero public input at these meetings. And I've been going to them for 30 years. And I find it really kind of surprising how little public interaction there is. So one thing you can do is get involved with the RWRC or the IC, and you can find out about those. You can contact me through my website or email me, and I can make contact for you there.
Okay, and the link to the legislation
Yeah, it was Cal Recycle, right there. Cal Recycle. Oh, I'm sorry. It's yeah, calrecycle.ca.gov/laws, and then there's a state organization, CAW Recycles, that also tracks legislation, and then also on the the implementation committee, the government committee that advises the Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission, they have a legislative report pretty much every month. So we have details on all of that.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to go ahead and move to the list of questions that we turned in ahead of time?
Sure, I can do that. And there's a few that came in on the chat. I can answer some on the chat real quick.
Okay, I know one was about foam, so I thought that might apply to.
So that's polystyrene foam, and local government has had taken a lot of action to not process polystyrene foam. Polystyrene, also known as styrofoam, is entirely recyclable. The problem is that it is a massive problem when it breaks up, because it gets into everything, and it even looks like food for animals when it gets into the environment. So despite the fact that it's recyclable, right, the markets are weak, as they are for pretty much all plastics other than 1 and 2. So plastics 3, 4, 5, and 6 are there's extraordinarily almost zero markets. And then plastics number 7, and I got to tell you, my frustration here is that some cities say that they take number 7 for recycling. Well, this is just absurd, because plastics number 7 is literally hundreds and hundreds of types of plastic. There is no specific number 7. 7 just means other. So cities really should not be saying that, because that stuff's not going to get recycled, and it's basically never been recycled, unless it's produced on industrial levels. So in terms of how to get this stuff recycled, it's possible that there could be places like Costco that could take them back, because what the EPS, extended producer, the polystyrene industry wants to do is to take that material back, and they've actually been providing, they're called densifiers. In other words, they take polystyrene foam and then they crush it down so it can be recycled. So it'd be great if there was a drop-off facility. And I can tell you, frankly, I'm just like everyone else. I'm very frustrated that we don't have enough drop-off facilities where we can just bring some material, like large material that we want to get. So it's, I think, very problematic to find a good recycling center that could take all these things, because there's very few, and local government can do more about that. So yeah, about this, another question was why the recent spike in food waste. It's almost certainly because of that people are consuming more packaged foods, and it has to do with the lifestyle in California, that you have more and more people that are doing more and more work, and they spend less time at home and cooking and then using what they have. And so there's been some efforts like trying to get people to use leftovers, and which I think is just not going to work. And but ultimately what it came down to is that the state passed legislation, SB 1383, that will puts massive requirements on local government to reduce food waste going to landfills, because food waste, when it decomposes, creates methane, and methane is about 22 times more, it holds 21 to 22 times more heat than CO2. So, think of it as just, like a bubble of CO2, but then if it's methane, it's 22 times larger. So it just moves around the environment, holding in heat, which means the temperature of the planet goes up. So the idea here with 1383 is to first do what we call food rescue. And so there's this really wonderful woman that's working with the implementation committee and the Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission, creating a program where they're driving around a truck and picking up food from cafeterias and then diverting it to people who need it. And then the other food waste, there's in San Jose, we have what's called an AD facility, anaerobic digestion, where they're actually taking food waste in a closed environment to actually promote the creation of methane so it can be burned and used as energy. And then the residual food waste is then composted. So it's really a pretty fantastic operation they have there. It's out on Zanker Road. Yeah, there's about legislation that I think is most important to support. I really think that, so the question is, what legislation would you think is most important to support, perhaps subsidies for recycled products? I'm not a fan of subsidies. I think that, it takes away the responsibility from those who create the problem. And what I mean by those is not individuals, but industry, right? So the most important thing to support will be the ballot initiative that will be available in 2022 that requires the plastics industry to take back plastics. That will be a huge, it will just offer so much benefit. And we're going to see a massive amount of advertising from the industry that's going to tell us all kinds of, horror stories about why that's not a good idea. And that's simply because what the plastics industry wants is for you to continue to throw it away, for us to eventually build garbage burners and burn their product because they think that energy is the solution. In other words, they want to maintain linear systems. And I can tell you that there's just zero science that supports any of that. So the ballot initiative in 2022 about packaging is the best thing to do. Yeah, I think the question about is the presentation will be available. I understand it's going to be posted somewhere on the League of Women Voters website. Yes, thank you for somebody who posted a link for the Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission. That's fantastic. They meet, they have meetings maybe once a quarter. They try to meet monthly, but they're not often able to do that. They meet down at the county, and it's even better now because you can attend those meetings via Zoom. And the political leaders, they're just like me and you. There's a lot of things that they don't know. What they know is stuff that's brought to them by the staff. The real power is with the staff, not the elected people. And I really think that there's not enough input from the public to express what their concerns are and actions that they want to have taken. So there's a last question here that I see on the chat. Local actions have driven state action. What can we do locally? Does San Jose, in opinion, do a good job? What can we push for? I've worked with San Jose since I was their first environmental specialist. So I've been there since the beginning of their curbside program. Well, I don't work for the city of San Jose. But I always think that we can do a better job. I think that there's a number of key problems. For example, the landfill, it costs way too much for people to go to landfills. And as a result of that, when people go, they go once and then they cost so much money, they end up doing a lot of illegal dumping. That's my belief. I think that the garbage trucks create a lot of pollution because they drive through the streets and there's a lot of litter after the city's really not engaging in solving that problem. There's a lot of contamination of curbside recyclables. The city's trying to figure out what to do about that. But I think one of their key problems is that you have many people that live in certain homes and they don't separate things correctly. And they probably never will. So there could be more outreach. There's got to be right sizing containers at homes, and then somehow find a way to make that work cost effectively. And so there's a lot they can do. And they have a huge staff. I don't understand why they're not more effective with the massive number of people that they have, particularly when you compare that with other cities that have much smaller staffs. So yeah, I think that they can do much more, including collecting food waste. I think San Jose could be doing that. There's a great company in Santa Clara that's converting food waste into animal feed that is highly sought after because it's got super high protein levels. And so this would also help the environment because of all the energy and resources we put into growing food would then go into having that food waste made into animal feed. That would just be wonderful. I think San Jose could do a lot by engaging in that.
Could
yeah.
you show us I know we're getting close to the end of the time and people had asked, the questions ahead of time. Could you show us on the Q&A?
Sure, I have some of those here. Well, there's asking about what can the League of Women Voters do? And I say really support EPR legislation and then have yourself known as a presence at these meetings with the Technical Advisory Committee, the Recycling and Waste Commission, and the IC. And even work within yourself to figure out what are the key issues that you want to address. And I'm happy to work with you on that and really focus on the big stuff, not the small things. There's been legislation that would do things like, banned giving away plastic straws. And it's like, that's just going to be, it's a waste of time from my perspective, because instead, if you just require plastic manufacturers to take back plastics or by having a minimum recycled content, that closes the loop, because the only communication that works in industry is markets, is money and markets. So that's where government should be pressuring industry to act on, because we've got a massive societal problem. So about the materials that go in your recycling bins, no, local government and the management companies that they hire cannot recycle all of these. And that's because many of these plastics are simply not recyclable. The other problem is that paper, which is the largest quantity material, much of it gets contaminated. So we have had laws in the past, like required minimum recycled content in newspaper. We need to have more of that in things like with cardboard boxes, for example. And we need delivery companies like Amazon looking at reusable primary packaging, so that when they bring stuff to your house, they don't put a package inside of a box that you end up having to just toss both of them. Be great if they have some kind of reusable packaging solution. There's more answers to that. Another is that about the countries that used to buy certain types are no longer interested in them, and can you still recycle them? Well, to a large degree, the answer is no, and that's because it's still hard to sort these materials at the material recovery facilities. There is a movement right now with the infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress from the recycling industry, saying that recycling is infrastructure too. In other words, they're trying to push for some funding to have better technology to sort materials to meet market conditions. Currently, with China limiting what they'll take because of basically it's polluted materials, because you have, paper mixed with plastic, and then so they don't want that. So what's been happening is that then that material goes to another country like Cambodia and Vietnam, and now they're also starting to say, we're not going to take it either. So we are exploiting these other countries when we export this material and don't sort it enough. So part of that will be the sorting that we do at home, but part of that problem is that we have these single containers, right? One recycling bin where we mix everything. So that creates a problem in the first place. So local government's got a problem. I don't think they're ever going to move away from the single recycling cart. So the only solution then is better sorting, which means better equipment. So how does our recycling programs compare to other cities in the Bay Area and the rest of California? Well, you know, our programs always depend on markets, and we need to really, again, we just need to do a much better job. And compared to other states, yeah, we are doing much better than most states. Some have some really super programs. Pennsylvania has some great stuff. Others are amazingly ignorant. I was in Texas recently, and I felt like I was committing a sin when there was no place to put my beverage container. And there's no recycling bin. So it's there's a lot more that can be done. Congress could act, but I think, as you all know, Congress is just it's a quagmire of inaction, primarily because you have the Republicans that don't want to give the Democrats any victories, and it's just shockingly unpatriotic from my perspective that Congress is not engaging in solutions. Now, this question about San Jose not collecting plastic bags and thin film plastics, that's true, and the city was involved with other cities to work on legislation that eventually became state legislation that banned plastic bags, essentially banned it. I mean, it's not really banned because, of course, you can pay and they'll give you a bag. One thing that's kind of interesting about that, by the way, people think that paper is better than plastic. That's entirely false. There's life cycle analysis that are out there. Plastic is by far better, quote unquote, for the environment because it uses so much less energy to produce. But the problem is the end of life of plastic, because those plastic bags basically aren't getting recycled. So whereas they use much less energy, there's no markets for them, but there is a market for paper bags, which is why the ultimate solution is bring your own, which is what we've been doing, and it was legislated through the state, and then it also was on a ballot, which the voters enthusiastically supported. So yeah, definitely a problem with film plastics. About garbage and collection services in San Jose, how do they differ between commercial and residential customers? Well, the city views apartments as a business, right? Which really kind of defies logic, because it's not, it's a business only for whoever owns the property, but it's people who live there. And so the waste stream is entirely different from that of a business. Nonetheless, it's collected and then it goes to a sorting facility. Whereas stuff that's garbage goes directly to a landfill. It's not going to get sorted. What I tell people is that there is no such thing as the recycling fairy, right? There isn't somebody who's going to magically pull out the recyclables from stuff that goes to the landfill. Just not going to happen, right? Because again, the incentive is always money, right? It's the cost of removing things or the value of material when it gets sold. So what we must do is to create value for materials. And the only way to do that is going to be requiring minimum recycled content in products. And in particular, that would be packaging. So how does San Jose's composting program work? It's pretty fascinating, really. They collect this material on the street. It was designed by a guy, Richard Gertman. He still lives downtown San Jose, did the same thing up in Davis when he worked up there. And that material goes to in the South County, right up next to, I just forgot the name of the other county that adjoins us in the South. But there's this massive facility there where they take this material, they dump it into what's called a tub grinder. Just basically, it sounds you know, just like that. It's a huge tub where they drop it in, it grinds up, spits it out, and then they put it in what's called a windrow. It's like a triangular shape that will go on for hundreds of feet, and then it just sits there and decomposes. It's remarkable how hot these things get. You know, you stick your hand in there and you almost feel like your hand's burning, but it's just nature decomposing this stuff. And then they sort it after it cooks for a while. And then once it's sorted, they have different qualities of material. And their biggest market is the agriculture market in Monterey and South County and in that ag area next to them. And they also make mulch. You know, you can see that mulch in a lot of areas around your neighborhood and cities. It's generally kind of a reddish color. They add some iron ore to, like when they get wood, construction debris, and grind that up. Yeah, it's pretty cool to see that stuff. Oh yeah, how much of an increase in packaging waste has there been during COVID? Oh man, it's been massive. One of my students actually gave a presentation to the Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission, and I was so happy to see what a great job she did because it's just remarkable. Yeah, cardboard is way up, and I'm absolutely convinced that you know, what the COVID and what the pandemic has caused is a massive shifts in consumerism. We're going to have, you know, now that we've had to work at home, you have more people are doing things like this, like Zoom, that never did before, but they're also getting more products that are delivered to them, and they're getting more comfortable with that. And so we're going to see that's going to continue, which means that we're going to have this more and more and more essentially cardboard and packaging, which is why it's essential that this material be made of recycled content materials. It's from my mind, it's just kind of insanity to pay subsidies to cut down forest, and for example, national forest that you and I own, and then there's private forest. So we pay subsidies for companies to build roads to extract this material, and then they make a product, and then we consume it, and then you pay again to get rid of it, or you may pay to have it recycled. So you pay taxes at one end and you pay taxes at the other end. This is kind of nuts, right? So what we really should be doing is have that stuff get into the cycle, right? By making it recycled content. So there's more of this material. By the way, all of your personal protection equipment, your PPE, trash, right, belongs in the garbage. That's what you do. This question about how much of a difference is bring your own bag is made in San Jose. Well, I can tell you that the operators of the material recovery facilities, they love it, because plastic bags would get caught up in all the machinery there. You know, you can imagine that there's massive amount of conveyor belts and many things that are turning, and plastic film would get caught up in those things. So they'd have to shut down the facility. And now you've got, you know, tens, 20, you know, 50 people standing around waiting that you're paying while they're trying to get this machinery cleaned up. So there's been, I saw a study that showed that there was a big drop in plastic bag waste. I think it was done by the people who do the beach cleanups. So it's been important in terms of reducing pollution, meaning litter, right? And about COVID on this ordinance, the governor put a requirement that it suspended the bring your own bag requirement until, right, there was science that came out and said that people bringing their bags is not a problem. So now, you know, we know that we can bring our own bags, but for a while we could not. Okay, so we understand that San Jose bales its recyclables and sells them as resources. Do we ever audit what happens? So the city of San Jose requires these reports that come from the vendors. So, you know, all cities do this. cities have contracts with haulers, garbage haulers. They have contracts for recycling haulers. And then they have contracts with companies that process the material. I don't think that there's enough light that's shined onto this data. I found it extraordinarily difficult to get and to find it. And I think it'd be good to put a little public pressure out there to get that information, because that's where policy is driven from, is from data. The problem is that, you know, cities get concerned that that news is going to come out that a lot of things that are collected for recycling end up getting landfilled, and so they have, I believe, a fear of being blamed, whereas they aren't the problem. The problem is the markets, right? So it's important to focus on the problem so we can create the correct solutions, right? So that everyone then is satisfied with the effort that local government's putting in, that state government's putting in, that industry is putting in. This thing about we can't recycle styrofoam, I kind of addressed that before. So styrofoam is the trade name that Dow owns. It's expanded polystyrene, or EPS. So it's still being found out there and as a waste material. There's no legislation that I'm aware of that requires it being phased out. But I do believe that that local government really should be doing more to work with the EPS industry to have places where people could bring large quantities of this material, like when you get a television or some other kind of large equipment that is packed in polystyrene, or it can go to a densifier. So in other words, it's the problem of industry, but for industry to solve, but the government has to work with industry to solve that problem. And I think that they really need to do much more. Anything about, do I know of any initiatives on the horizon for reducing packaging or otherwise help with recycling programs? Well, yeah, that's, there's a couple of things. There's this California Commission on Recycling, Markets, and Curbside. They made recommendations. Frankly, I get tired of reading recommendations because they just end up in the air and go nowhere. There has to be implementation reports. How do you implement? And then the next steps, right? Well, there's enough people who got frustrated with how slow things move. And so the Plastic Pollution Initiative will be on the ballot in 2022. So here's information here on this PowerPoint about that ballot initiative. The San Jose Mercury had an article on it the other day, and you could Google it. I think it is a great solution to the problem. And then there are many other bills that are moving through the legislature. There is always dozens of these bills that move through. And Californians Against Waste is a good source for managing, keeping track of this legislative information. I think there's a few more here. How do we reduce reliance on plastics? Well, first of all, I don't think we can. You know, there's a lot of focus on individual action, like what you can do as an individual. And I just think that is more of a personal choice. It's not going to be an institutional solution. An institutional solution requires industry and government, right, to create a solution. It's individuals that need to point out the problem, right? That here we are, we're just consumers. We consume this stuff. And so you can take whatever action you want to make less of a problem, but there's going to be hundreds of other people who don't even consider it. You know, there's a lot of benefits to plastics. There's no doubt about it. You know, we know that products will last much longer on plastic. It's lightweight, it's unbreakable, so it's great for transportation. It uses less energy to manufacture, but it is a forever and persistent pollutant. So all we need to do is have the industry be responsible for the product at the end of life. And that means creating a market, because that's the only language they speak. And because the Plastics Pollution Initiative will threaten how they do business and profit, they will, I'm absolutely certain they were going to fight this thing tooth and nail. And even if it passes, my guess is that they'll sue. They will do everything they can, just like the pharmaceutical industry did when the Med project rolled out. Local government wanted the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, to take back their unused prescriptions. They fought back. They lost in court in Alameda County. It went to the state Supreme Court. They lost again. Then they went to the US Supreme Court, and the US Supreme Court said local government can have this kind of initiative, you lose. So what that meant is that all of us won, because now we're collecting pharmaceuticals, and those therefore are not going into the water systems and getting into the environment. So do not drop your unused pharmaceuticals into the toilet, right? Bring them to the pharmacy drop-offs. Medproject.org has a list of sources. But in terms of reducing reliance on plastics, I don't think we're going to be able to do it. The right to repair, there's the Federal Trade Commission is considering regulations. Sounds like they're going to adopt that. That is fantastic. There's been a lot of pushing on that, because you have companies like Apple that design their products to basically so that they are thrown away and not repaired. So that's a key problem. And then about at-home recycling, I mean, when you have any kind of thing you're not sure what to do with, go to the Recycle Stuff website that I operate and help, and we'll be glad to help you. And by the way, let me just say, if our website is, we get like bare bones funding from local government, and we need to have a programmer to reprogram a bunch of coding language. So if you have any millionaires that want to get closer to heaven, I can help them by taking some of their money so we can upgrade the coding on our website.
Hey, Bruce, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished with that.
No,
you have more.
I'm done. No, that's good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for putting our questions on your slideshow and the answers. So now, and I presume we'll get a copy of your slideshow. So if anybody doesn't want to listen to the thing, they can see it all. It's a great slideshow. Thank you so much.
I will email it to you.
My favorite statement that you made was, if you make it, you must take it. I love that.
Yeah, you can quote me on that.
You bet. That's
and
great.
There's no such thing as a recycling fairy.
Okay, that's good too. Right. So thank you to everyone. We've run over a little bit today, but almost everybody stayed with us. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. Our next Lunch with League is on September the 16th. And a while ago, our board decided that we would plan to get together for a real lunch and in person for September. We've set things up with Palermo's restaurant, but with all the breakthroughs that are happening and the spreading viruses, we've not yet made the final decision of whether we will continue to use Zoom as we're doing now, or whether we'll finally get together with our league friends in person. So you'll have to watch your emails and everything and our website to find out what we decide that we're going to do this. We just want to make sure that everybody's safe and comfortable. So thanks again to all of us for joining us today. Stay safe and look forward to getting together in person again. Thanks.